let's randomly take, we're going to look at one position, one opening that I tried to recommend you. I recommended you on various DVDs. Bishop c4, knight f6. Now, but we are not going to look at the opening. We're going to look at the position after opening, what weaknesses is, and how do we play it? How do we play around these weaknesses, and how do we take advantage of it? Bishop c4, knight f6, e5, d5, bishop b5, knight e4, knight takes d4, bishop d7, bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6. We are not gonna make big stops in the opening and analyze it, because what I wanna show you is one specific type of positions. Knight d2, knight takes d2, queen takes d2, bishop b6, and knight b3. Now, here I will be talking to you about weaknesses, how to take advantage of it, and what really weaknesses are. Weaknesses are not necessarily some pawn or some piece of your opponent's is very weak. In this case, we have weaknesses on the c5 and d4 squares. So how do we take advantage of it? Now, we just played knight b3, and we want to blockade c5 and d4 squares if it's possible. Now, how do we do that? Black will try to prevent it. Queen e7. We want to put some piece on c5 square, which we cannot do at the moment. We're playing queen c3. Now, suppose our opponent plays f6. And here comes the first test. What do we put on c5? The knight or the bishop? And these are the key. Now we're going to talk about key elements of this strategy of taking advantage of weaknesses, and key strategy of blockade. Blockade and weakness goes hand to hand. So suppose we are thinking, a lot of people think like this, and it's a big mistake, that when we put knight c5 or bishop c5, our opponent is going to take. Well, if we know that our opponent is taking on c5, we definitely play bishop c5. And because now we have dominating piece, which is a knight, against light square bishop, then later you're going to support knight with b4, and that's the taking advantage of the position. And we're going to talk later how to take advantage of this, how to bring it to the win. However, in this position, bishop c5 is a wrong move. It's not correct. The reason is why, because black will not take on c5. Black will go simply maybe rook e8. Notice that queen is not hanging because white's king is exposed. So, and suppose you move the king and now black plays queen e6. Now, I gotta tell you here, either that way or black can play f takes c, f takes e, and then even play queen g5. You see, it's very, very difficult for white to maintain this blockade. Now you need a queen and knight supporting the bishop on c5. And interestingly enough, that black will never take this bishop on c5. They may go rook f5 later, and then you will see that knight on b3 has to be supporting this bishop on c5. And that's not a right idea. If we had wishful thinking if you have wishful thinking, you will definitely play bishop c5, somehow assuming that it's mandatory for black to take the bishop, but black obviously will not. The correct move here is knight c5. And again, there may be wrong thinking on white's part. Oh, I don't want to play knight c5 because eventually, not at the moment, eventually after fe, black will take the knight on c5 and we're going to have opposite color bishops and a draw. This is wrong thinking for two reasons. First of all, even if we get up after we get opposite color bishops, it's better than having your pieces tied up like this and you don't know what to do with the knight. Secondly, you should not be afraid of opposite color bishops, because those positions with opposite color bishops are with a big advantage for white. And the reason, suppose the pieces exchanged and black takes on c5. Just to let you understand why is this opposite color bishop position is very far away from a draw. There's few elements of this position that you have to understand. First of all, we have queens on the board. And it's known we have the F file controlled with the rook. And it's known that when you have an attack on your opponent's king or on any side of the board, it's better to have opposite color bishops, because your opponent cannot control squares that are attacked by your bishop. Your opponent's bishop cannot control the square. This position is very bad for black if not lost. Suppose black goes queen e6. Well, not to mention something else, there is a pawn which is very weak on a7, and white can play simply, just to give you some example of this position. White can play simply queen to f3, create threats, or maybe queen to g3, creating threat of rook f6, and black's rook cannot move because a7 pawn is hanging. So even if they play a6, when rook moves later, a6 pawn will be a target. Not to mention this, there is a possibility of direct successful attack after rook f6. I think white simply wins, because on queen e8 there is rook f8 check, and on queen g4 now it's okay even to exchange queens, because white is going to win several pawns. So you have, first of all, if you think that opposite color bishops always a draw, you have to reassess your opinion. First, when queen's on the board, it may be even better that you have an opposite color bishops. Secondly, not all endgames are drawn with opposite color bishops, especially if rooks are on the board. And this position very far from a draw. White has big positional advantage. Not to mention, now if you think about it, white is practically a pawn up, because you see the double pawns on c file totally worthless. And white has control of squares on a queen side, even on the king side, thanks to bishop on c5 controlling the f8 square. So this position is not good. It's a very bad position. Now going back to the position where we played knight c5. Now, this is very important to understand. Very important to understand. When we played knight c5, what is the best thing black can do? Well, black can play bishop f5. Now their bishop possibly will be placed on e4. Well, okay, we have to go rook a1 to e1 or bishop d4. And after exchanging pawns, black eventually, they may play rook f7, and we may go b4 to support the knight because you want to move the queen. So this is weaknesses on c5 square and d4 square allowed white to make a full board control on a full time control on dark squares. And now even if black takes on c5, white takes and black goes queen e6. You see, this is a little bit different from what we just looked with opposite color bishops, but concept is the same. Because it's a little different because black is eventually going to put bishop on e4. Bishop on e4 stands very well. Yeah, that's true, but again, the weakness on a7, possibility of getting f-file for white, and black is disabled to contest to challenge white on f-file because of the f8 square. That makes white's position much better. So there is nothing that can be done by black. For example, after bishop e4, we take on f7, queen is going to take, we're going to go rook f1, queen e6. Bishop stands better on e4, but evaluation doesn't change. White has clear advantage. If you're afraid of giving c2 pawn, you have time to go rook f2, protecting, and then queen g3. It's very hard to compare bishop on c5 and bishop on e4. They look like, this is very important to understand, they look like both very well placed bishops. Let me tell you the significant difference in this position that you can better understand concept of this position. Yeah, the both bishops are very well placed, that's true, but white has to play. White has a plan of pressuring king side by using this bishop, by using this c5 bishop. And if queens exchanged in future, white has possibility of activating the e pawn. And the most important thing, that black's bishop very well placed on e4, but there is nothing to go with it. So when you have some piece placed in the middle of the board, dominating position, you have to create some kind of a play where this piece can be used. Bishop on e4 is very well placed, but black has nothing to go with it. What this bishop can do by itself, it's nothing. All you can do is take a picture of this bishop and say, oh, I had a very good bishop. Yeah, it is good bishop, but absolutely in this position it's useless. If black could penetrate with his pieces and create attack, then this bishop can be used. But you see, white's bishop is used 100%. And white can go queen f4, they can go h4, h5, they can go rook f6. And if queen moves, e pawn may be activated. It's a big advantage. You have to understand, when you have the blockade, what has to go with it. Well, if we take queens off the board and rooks off the board, what do we have? We have a blockade, same everything, except we have no play. We have no play No plan and nothing to go with it. So blockade by itself means nothing if you don't create a play around it. So what you need, without queens and rooks, obviously, you have nothing. So in that position, you cannot exchange queens and rooks. And frankly, there is no way how black can even attempt to exchange pieces. Well, they sure can attempt to exchange queens like this. But if they exchange queens, here is what is going to happen. Bishop takes, and e6, followed by e7, gives black very difficult position. Suppose black goes h6, and after e7, rook e8, rook f8, check, and king h7. This position is absolutely lost for black. What white can just do, because black is totally paralyzed, white can just come with the king to a5 square. Well, you say it's a fantasy? No, it's very possible, and it's very easy, because there are no moves black can do to relieve the pressure. To relieve the pressure, that means the king will never come out anywhere. So you just go march king f2, d2, e3, and dark squares, and penetrate to a5, and take all the black pawns. So this is how you use opposite color bishops. Actually, they teaches you a little bit about opposite color bishops, that they are not always a draw. And most important, all this was possible because of black's weaknesses on dark squares. Now imagine pawn was on b6. We could never go bishop d4, and black will play rook e8. Even in the middle game, it's totally equal position. But here, white has control of all squares, and that's why we got totally winning position.